On this episode of ResiWeek, we talk the console game forecasts, math for profit, and AI facial recognition. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
We can't say the future without AI. I mean, there's no way around it. 50% of workers now believe AI is going to improve their experience. When I come into the meeting room, I need a way to incorporate my AI with what's going on in the meeting. It's almost a bring your own AI type of a concept. Most of what we do in our day-to-day is going to change significantly.
Hear the latest AV trends and predictions in this episode of Crestron's Smarter Spaces podcast on your preferred podcast platform.
This is ResiWeek, episode 388, Reaching Amateur Status. Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matthew Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, I'm pleased to be joined by two of my good friends. First, we have Avi Rosenthal. He's a partner at bluesalve. How you doing, Avi?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks so much for having me on. It's the height of the summer, and there's lots of stuff going on.
There is lots of stuff. Then we are also joined by the person I ask all of my jiu-jitsu questions to, Mr. Bob Archer. He's the senior editor at CE Pro. How you doing, Bob?
Good. And yourself, Matt?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a busy summer, which
I think we're kind of in the lull, but before Cedia starts.
Oh, that is 2 months away.
Not to throw rain on your parade, but
less than 60 days. Start counting.
No, I'm just trying to get through July. Our first article of the day that we're going to cover is from Bob himself. Console gaming market is going to experience some slow growth, just like all the other home entertainment industries. There is going to be a readjustment over the next little bit. Multiple sources are expecting kind of humble growth for the console gaming market. Avi, let me start with this and go read the rest of the article. Bob covers some really good stuff in this. How much of this is pandemic related, i.e. we saw a massive spike, versus the lack of new consoles, the lack of new titles? And I will preface this all with, I am not a big gamer. I think I have an Xbox 360 somewhere in my rack that probably doesn't work anymore. But I haven't got excited for a game or contemplated buying a game since probably like a Call of Duty years ago. I don't even know what's out. I just know that it doesn't seem to get the fanfare it used to.
You're not watching the right fan or fair, or because there is. I mean, there have been a couple of really big titles that have come out as of late, but going back to your original question, I think it's all three of those things. So I think it's the bullwhip effect of the pandemic, where everybody went out and bought a console. You know, the whether it was a Switch or a PS or a Xbox, everybody went out and bought one because we were all trapped inside. It's the titles, the content seems to be driving, but because of the supply chain stuff, there were a lack of consoles on the market, right? There were a lot of trouble in getting the chips and the processors and things like that. And so, you know, people waited in line, but they got their boxes and now they're playing their boxes. I also think it's a little bit of FUD factor involved with the Microsoft Activision acquisition that's been going on for quite a while now. It looked like it was going to happen, and now it doesn't look like it may happen, and now it's being fought over. And, you know, there's a lot of back and forth. It looked like Sony was going to sort of take a back seat, but now they're taking a front seat. So I think all of those things have contributed to it. But more importantly, it's more about the you know, we're not spending money on in our house stuff right now. We're spending money on our out of house stuff. And so I think that's indicative of what's going on in the high AV market. It's indicative of what's going on in the outdoor kitchen market. And Home Depot and Lowe's have seen downturns over the last quarter. And again, I hate calling them downturns, because what they are is just readjustment to reality. If you remove the 2020, 2021 numbers and you look at where the ramp was from 17 to 18 to 19, you know, we're on par. You know, high-end audio is doing well. You know, the gaming is doing well, networking is doing well, things like that. Tomorrow is a big summer sale day, right? You got Amazon Prime Day coming up this week. Target's got big sales running. So I think, again, it's more about the adjustment from a pandemic world to a non-pandemic world. And I don't think it's a reason to panic. I think it's very good that we know what's going on, but I don't think anybody really needs to readjust their businesses based on it. I think everything is going to flow the way that you expect it to.
All right. Bob, when you follow this, what is going to drive the next boon in this market? Is it going to be some form of AR? Is it going to be, again, just new content? Is it going to be the next generation of consoles? Because we've had the current gen for what, Avi, 3 years?
Yeah, coming on 3 years now.
What's going to drive the future?
I think it is going to be stuff like AR, VR, and things like that. As a matter of fact, this morning I plugged in a story in the CE Pro. It'll post soon on the evolution of the multi-purpose or home theater space as a more multi-purpose environment where people will watch TV, sports, they'll stream their movies, and they'll game. They'll game with consoles. Maybe it'll be the golf simulators. Maybe it'll be some other interactive kind of game system like that. But that'll be the next wave. And right now, that's great for our guys because we're talking high-end market stuff. Over the next several years, I think it'll trickle down into the mainstream.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, gentlemen, let's move on to our next topic of the day. This comes to us from Residential Systems, Math for Fun and Profit, Vitals, Matt Bernarth. It's another one of his articles on business support. Go take a read through it. What he's doing is breaking down your profit level levers and understanding how to truly understand your profit and where that's coming from, where you're making money, where you're losing money, et cetera, et cetera. Let me start with you on this, Bob. Every time I see an article like this, or every time somebody really gets into the nitty gritty of business management, I'm of two minds. One, I'm happy that someone keeps doing it because so many people in our industry really need it. I also try to grasp kind of a more of an overarching question of, is this going to be the thing that's going to sink our industry? The lack of good business practices.
It hasn't yet.
Yeah, exactly. Avi's right on the money there. It's been like that for decades at this point. I think these guys have had to readjust. There was a time where margins on these products, think back to, plasma TVs and some of the other things in the margins that guys were getting on those. Now they do have to be better in how they bid and how they, sell their systems. But this is an ongoing problem, more so in the resi side than the commercial side. The entire resi industry could learn to look at the commercial market, and I don't think many people have looked at how commercial guys bid and how they conduct business.
Or just look at, any number of basic business books.
Well, but Matt, I think it also comes down to it was always surprising to me how somebody would run a business and be willing to pay X number of dollars for something for their business. And that same service, when it came to their home, there was a substantial discount expected because it was being used for home. And so I can remember back when I was an integrator and we would do some light commercial stuff. We do a bar or a restaurant every once in a while. And then we would do the owner's home, and they would look at us like, wait, you want to charge me the same amount that you did for my business to put it in my house? But I'm the only one using it here. Well, but it's the same equipment. So the guys that are doing strictly residential are working on a tighter margin and a tighter profit center than the guys doing commercial. And so articles like this really open up their eyes to all of the things that they may look at their checkbook at the end of the the month and wonder, well, we had a great month. The revenue was great and we did all these installs. Why is there nothing left? And sometimes it's really hard to see the forest for the trees. And I think what this article does is it opens up some people's ideas to some of the things they may not have considered in the profitability of their businesses, and to take a serious look at them. So I look at it too with the sort of the double-edged sword of, why don't they know this? But sometimes it's hard when you're in the day-to-day.
Well, I mean, the reason that I get concerned when I see I don't get concerned when I see the articles. I get concerned that most people are going to gloss over the articles the same way they glossed over anything that was done from Cedia's side when they were trying to promote business practices, not the technical aspects of the job, but the aspect of running your business.
Right.
And I contrast it to the construction industry, where that has kind of gone. There's been a significantly larger gap between small companies, mom and pop shops that they're running quote unquote like a business, but there's a lot of stuff going on. It's not a saleable product.
Right.
When those owners decide they no longer want to do it, that business will close.
Yes.
It is not something that is designed or fit to be purchased.
Right.
Then there's everybody else who's running like a big business that just happens to work in construction. That's what I feel keeps happening in our industry, specifically on the resi side, is the majority of businesses, they're not sellable strictly from the fact that they're not run like an actual business.
And there was a time in the construction industry when it was as fragmented as well. I think it's a maturation problem. When you go to the National Association of Home Builders show, you go to the big builders show, there's an entire store run by the NAHB with books and textbooks and courses and classes and things to help all of these builders sort of run their businesses and understand the profitability of them. And I think that hasn't happened as much in our industry. I mean, look, I can remember when Helen Henneveld had, Bedrock, and Bedrock would go into an integrator and teach them, have all the right forms and all the right things and all the right, but in our industry in general, a lot of the people who work in our industry came from other places. And so this may be the first time they're running a business, and there's still an immaturity when it comes to how to deal with this. And so I applaud Vital's efforts and Origin, for sponsoring it in sort of helping lift these guys up, because there's no doubt that it has been a problem in our business, right? And it's a problem that doesn't necessarily exist in the security world. Companies are bought and sold and traded in the security world all the time because of the way that they structure themselves and the learning process that they went through and the recurring revenue.
The recurring revenue, Avi, is a big thing, though.
Absolutely, Bob. You're absolutely
where I would say, we may forget about this, but a lot of these dealers in our industry are small guys that are wearing multiple hats. Yeah. And I think it's simply a big ask for these guys to have to, okay, you've got to go out and bid. You've got to go out and install. You've got to go out and pick up the gear for the day. That there are only so many hours in the day. Yeah. And it's a tough thing for them, on top of being, they may be an expert in home control or networking, or they may be an audio enthusiast or whatever it may be, to ask them to step outside of their core discipline to tackle something like business management is an entirely different ask.
I absolutely agree, Bob. I absolutely agree. And that's why I think what Vital is attempting to do, where they're, the rising tide is lifting all boats, and they're trying to educate, the poor people who are working those 18-hour days and then come back and they're like, oh, now I have to do expenses and accounting. It's a tough road to hoe. There's no doubt about it. We've all been there.
Yeah, it's tough. All right, gentlemen, let's change topics yet again. This comes to us from Residential Systems, a new white paper from Parks Associates on facial recognition. It addresses the role of facial recognition technology for security and personalization in the home. There's a link directly there to go take a look at that white paper, and they cover a lot of things, and they've got a bunch of numbers in here. Specifically, one of the ones that stuck out to me was that 37% of consumers trust the companies that have access to their personal data. We could go in so many directions on this. Avi, let's start with maybe the simplest one is there's tons of facial rec that's coming out and being available in smart home products, in IoT products,
Yep.
Whether it's a doorbell, whether it's a camera system, whether it's an alarm panel, whether it's a refrigerator. I would just love a refrigerator that would keep my 3-year-old out of it. That's all I think he needs.
But they're probably not tall enough for the facial recognition camera. It's like,
oh no, he climbs on the bottom drawer
right,
and gets up. Oh yeah, it's very impressive. My question to you, Avi, that we'll kick this off with is this good or bad for our industry? And should we get involved in this side of it?
So it's terrifying. It's actually, in a word, it is terrifying. But it's not terrifying, I think, for the reason that you're probably thinking. The technology itself is not scary, right? The idea that a camera is looking at your face and deciding that you are who you say you are is something that's been around for quite a long time. It's used by governments. It's used, look, every time you pick up your cell phone, chances are your cell phone is looking at your face, recognizing who you are and opening up your cell phone. The reason why it's terrifying for me is because it's reaching amateur status. And that's the part that's terrifying. When people who are not completely educated about all of the nuances of data privacy, data regulation, data liability, cybersecurity, start to utilize some of these systems with some really sensitive data in it, that's the part that scares me down to my very bone. So if I'm an integrator, how do I deal with this? Well, first of all, don't use anything from a company you don't know everything about. All right, that's number one. We all know who the big names in our industry are. We all know who the long-term players are. We all know who we have trust in. You work with those companies when you're dealing with data privacy. You don't buy something off of some Alibaba, Amazon website that you don't know the legitimacy or longevity of and use it in a system, even though it may be cool tech or it may be the greatest gadget or it may be the right price. Data privacy is the part that is the terrifying part to me. So the facial rec, I get. We use it every day. No problem. Being the integrator and installing it and then monitoring it, configuring it, and maintaining it, totally different issue.
So Bob, given what Avi just said, we do know the big players. But as we've seen in recent lawsuits with all the big players, they're not doing a great job of maintaining that data either. At what point do we as a channel kind of sit back and just do the you know what? I don't want to touch that.
That's a really I think that's a case by case basis. You ask me, I'm going to say what my opinion is. Avi will have his own opinion. You have your own opinion. I think that's up to everyone's own discretion. I think the whole key is to be transparent with end users about this whole thing. We're still in the early stages of this. I think back to several years ago when Samsung got caught for illegally listening to consumers with their smart TVs. And how that impacted things. Do we really know if it's any different now? We all question our privacy when you get those pop-up ads after you've been looking at a set of sneakers on Google or something. But I think everybody will take it case by case, and it'll depend on how they feel about that and how inclusive they want those technologies into their lives.
So I'm to the point where internally in our company, we're having conversations about whether we're going to sell smart CCTV systems and not your traditional DVR, NVR based, but specifically the smart home stuff from the privacy issues. And we were talking about this last week on the show in reference to some of the Hikvision stuff and the Dawei stuff, which again, I'm only naming them because it was on the show and there's a massive BBC article about it. But there are some legitimate legal concerns internally for us as a company where we just don't want to be involved in that necessarily. We haven't come to terms on it, but it's an active conversation internally with our stakeholders and with our legal team.
And disclosing that information and the potential of it towards your client who's buying these systems, who in turn is dealing with the public in whatever capacity that they're dealing with them. Yes, it opens up an enormous can of worms.
So I think, Matt, if we talk about what the integrators should be doing to sort of protect themselves, I think what Bob said is absolutely right, is the transparency of it. So I wouldn't necessarily shy away from the installation. If a client comes to you and says, I want a video analytics system so I can see the cars that are pulling in or the people walking up or things like that. But I'd be damn sure that I would make sure that they sign a document that limits my liability. So if they happen to see something and get in trouble for seeing it, or they record something or something leaks out, that client knows that, these are the possibilities. The transparency in the conversation between you and your client is the most important part. What's going to protect you in the end and turn a potentially adversarial relationship into a partnership relationship is when you can sit down with that client 6 months later when they're holding a lawsuit in their hands and say, okay, we talked about this. We talked about the fact that your system was going to do this, this, and this is how it was storing it, and this is what happened, and let's work together to work on a solution, rather than you just being served because the client didn't understand the technology, didn't understand the liability of it, and is now coming to you screaming, oh my God, this is what happened. My daughter's image leaked out, and now it's all over the interwebs. So I think that the conversation is with the client and making sure that they understand what's going on and get them to sign something. We did it back in the day in the security world, and they still do it now. Yeah. When you install a security system, they sign a contract. That contract specifically limits the liability of what happens if, God forbid, that security system doesn't work or works too well or doesn't work at all or what have you. I think that the same kind of T's and C's, the same kind of terms and conditions have to be applied to some of these newer technologies and some of this data privacy issue.
Yeah, we've talked about that for years on the show, that you shouldn't be selling anything without some T's and C's that specifically state that you ain't liable for anything.
Exactly.
And I think what gets lost in most conversations with clients, to both of your points, is there's a lot of integrators that have transparency with their clients, but it's just a spoken conversation. Yeah. It's not followed up with that. Yeah. So now that we talked about this, here you go. Can you sign right here? Say that we talked about this and that you agree to all this.
Yeah.
Just before we leave this topic, I got sent something from one of my manufacturers the other day, which I found very interesting. It was a camera system designed for a construction site, where the analytics within the cameras and the system could determine who was on site based off facial rec, and then whether or not they were in compliance for high-vis vests and hard hats.
Wow.
And we've seen this. We saw this in the middle of COVID in a way where we were selling some systems based on tracking numbers of people walking in and out of doors using cameras.
Yep.
This is a whole other area. Is there concern, or is this something that is honestly helpful to us?
So in my mind, it's helpful. I used to be the high-vis hard hat police on my jobs, right? I was the guy come rolling up, and I'd put my hat on, and I'd go walking in, and it'd be three of my guys pulling cable, and their hard hats sitting on the ground right next to them, because we did work in Florida, and it was freaking hot, and there's nothing hotter than wearing a hard hat in the Florida sun, right? And I understood.
Rookies, you got to clip that to your belt like a boss.
Right? There's nothing, but
I mean, if I ever did something like that.
Right, exactly. Shh. Exactly. But so I think that it helps in the compliancy. I mean, it does open up a lot of questions in my mind about where else that data is going. OSHA going to have access to that data? Or is my insurance company going to have access to that data? You know, unfortunately, when an accident happens, is somebody then going to look at that camera data and go, aha, you see, he wasn't wearing his hard hat? Or the reverse of, all right, well, thank God he was wearing his hard hat. You know, I like to put these in a positive spin. But I think at the end of the day, these are the kinds of things that we can expect out of the world in the future. Many other countries already do this with regularity, and not just the communist ones, right? Of course, it's a different issue. But most countries do it with compliancy these days. I was in Singapore a few weeks ago, and there's a lot of construction going on, and we walked the Formula One. They're getting ready for the Formula One race down in Singapore, and it was all under construction. And, we walked through the area, and, a couple of the guys, pointed at us. And, of course, they said in whatever language they were speaking. I'm sure we got yelled at, but we didn't understand it. But there were cameras everywhere watching the guys work. And there were cameras and signage everywhere talking about the fact that they were under surveillance. And I think it's just a matter of time before a lot of things that we sort of take for granted are, in fact, being monitored, to make sure that things are in compliancy and there's safety involved. We've all been on job sites where guys have gotten hurt, and it's very unfortunate when it happens. And 9 times out of 10, you're second guessing, like, well, why wasn't he wearing his steel boots? And why wasn't he wearing the high view? And how did he get in the way of the forklift or what have you? And I think these camera systems, although they sound very obtrusive, in the future can actually help.
So, Bob, just before we wrap this up, are we going to have to go beyond the traditional, big placard that says the site is under surveillance and go to the site is under surveillance as well as compliance for these things?
I think it'll be commonplace. We're not going backwards with any of these technologies. It's going to move forward whether people want it or not. I think it'll be up to the legal system to adapt to be able to cope with whatever legalities are the result of these new technologies. And I think it'll be as ambiguous as anything else these days, as a Ring doorbell or whatever. So it's here whether we want it or not.
That's the truth. All right, gentlemen, let's wrap it up there. Thank you both so much for joining us. Bob, if people want to connect with you, learn more about CE Pro, where can they do that?
They can go to CE Pro at cepro.com, or they can find me on Instagram, and that my handle on Instagram is BA1 Boston.
I love that you have it, because that means I don't have to read it off your title card here.
I looked before we hopped on.
There you go. Right?
I love it. Avi, thank you for joining us. If people want to connect with you, learn more about bluesalve, how can they do that?
So certainly on our website at www.bluesalve.com. And then I'm a member of Threads, and my handle on Threads is Avi Rosenthal IoT. So please come and join me on Threads. We're having interesting conversations about IoT every day.
Every day. All right. Thank you again for joining us. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on Twitter at Matt D. Scott and every other social platform, including Threads and Instagram and everything other than TikTok. But more importantly, please visit AVNation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you check them out as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek.